The relentless New York rain wasn't gentle. It was a cold, needling assault. It soaked through Maria's thin coat as she hurried from the subway station, her worn-out sneakers splashing through oily puddles. Each drop felt like a tiny hammer on her tired shoulders. She clutched the straps of her cleaning supply bag tighter, the weight of the bottles and brushes a familiar anchor in the swirling city. Her thoughts, as always, were a tight knot of numbers. Rent due next week. The reminder from Luis's doctor in Ecuador about the cost of his physical therapy. The ever-rising price of groceries. Her small, one-bedroom apartment in Queens wasn't much, but it was a fortress against the world, a place where she could be alone with her worries and the ghost of the life she'd left behind. She was almost at her building, head down against the wind, when a movement in the recessed doorway of a closed bodega caught her eye. A figure, huddled and shivering, trying to become one with the brickwork. Maria's first instinct, honed by years of city life, was to tighten her grip on her bag and walk faster. Don't make eye contact. Don't get involved. Her own problems were a heavy enough load. But as she passed, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene for a split second. It was a man, his clothes drenched, his face pale and etched with a profound exhaustion that went beyond the physical. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just trying to disappear. Maria took 5 more steps, her conscience a war zone. The memory of her first week in this country surfaced, unbidden. She had been lost, disoriented, her English a broken mess. An old Ukrainian woman at a bus stop had seen her panic, had gently taken her arm and guided her onto the right bus, refusing the dollar Maria tried to offer. "We help," the woman had said simply. That small act of kindness had been a lifeline. Now here she was, walking past someone who was clearly drowning. She stopped. The rain plastered her hair to her face. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, she turned around and walked back to the doorway. The man looked up as she approached, his eyes wide with a flicker of fear. He looked ready to bolt. "Señora?" he mumbled, his voice raspy. "Come," Maria said in Spanish, her voice softer than she intended. "You cannot stay here. You will get sick." She gestured with her head towards her apartment building, just a few doors down. The man stared at her, disbelief warring with desperate hope. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe in his late 20s. His jeans and jacket were good quality, but now ruined by the storm. "It's okay," Maria added. "I am just a cleaning lady. I don't have much, but I have a dry floor and some coffee." Hesitantly, he unfolded himself from the doorway. He was tall, and he moved stiffly, as if every muscle ached. He didn't speak, just gave a slight, grateful nod. Maria led the way, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was this foolish? Probably. But the image of the Ukrainian woman's kind eyes was stronger than her fear. She unlocked the main door to her building, then her apartment door on the second floor, the familiar click a sound of both sanctuary and isolation. She pushed it open, revealing her small, immaculate home. A crucifix hung on one wall, a faded photograph of her son, Luis, smiled from a small table. It was a humble place, but it was warm and it was clean. "Please enter," she said. The stranger hesitated on the threshold, looking down at his muddy, waterlogged shoes. With a quiet, respectful movement, he slipped them off, leaving them outside her door. The small act of courtesy touched Maria deeply. It told her he was a good person, just down on his luck. He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the modest room. "The bathroom is there," Maria said, pointing. "There is a clean towel. You can get dry. I will make food." "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "My name is David." He didn't offer a last name, and Maria didn't ask. Some stories were too heavy to tell. He disappeared into the bathroom, and Maria moved to her small kitchen, her hands automatically pulling out a pot, some onions, rice, and the last of the chicken she'd been saving for the weekend. The familiar rhythm of cooking soothed her nerves. The apartment filled with the comforting aroma of sautéed onions and garlic, a smell that felt like a hug. This was what she did when she was worried or sad. She cooked. It was her love language, her therapy. As the soup simmered, she could hear the shower running. She laid out a pair of sweatpants and an old sweatshirt of hers. They would be too small, but they were dry, on the closed bathroom door. When David emerged, his hair damp, dressed in her too tight clothes, he looked both vulnerable and more human. The grime of the streets was gone, revealing the sharp lines of his jaw and the intelligent, haunted look in his hazel eyes. He sat at her small table, and she placed a steaming bowl of caldo de gallina in front of him. For a long moment, he just stared at it, as if he'd forgotten what a home-cooked meal looked like. Then he began to eat, slowly at first, then with a ravenous hunger that spoke of days without proper food. Maria sat opposite him with her own bowl, eating in silence. She didn't press him with questions. She just let the quiet companionship of the meal fill the space between them. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window, and the occasional clink of a spoon against a bowl. When he was finished, he looked up at her, his eyes glistening. "I have nowhere to go," he said quietly, the confession seeming to cost him a great effort. "I lost everything. My wallet, my phone. All of it gone." Maria nodded slowly, her heart aching for him. She knew that kind of loss, the feeling of the ground disappearing from under your feet. "You can sleep on the sofa tonight," she said, her decision final. "It is not much, but it is safe and warm." She busied herself clearing the plates, giving him a moment to compose himself. She fetched a spare blanket and a pillow, making up the small couch as best she could. It was a tight fit for a man his size, but it was infinitely better than a wet doorway. "Thank you, Maria," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything. I will not forget this." She just smiled a tired, sad smile. "Sleep well, David," she said, and turned off the light, retreating to her bedroom and closing the door. She lay in bed for a long time, listening to the city sounds and the soft breathing of the stranger in her living room, wondering if her small act of faith had been a mistake or a blessing in disguise. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The first light of dawn was a pale, gray smear against the window when Maria awoke. For a moment, in the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, the events of the previous night felt like a dream. A strange, rain-soaked dream of a man named David and a pot of chicken soup. Then, the memory solidified, sharp and real. The stranger. In her living room. A sudden, cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She lay perfectly still, listening. The apartment was silent. Too silent. There was no sound of breathing, no rustle of blankets from the other side of her door. Just the distant, ever-present hum of the city waking up. Carefully, quietly, she slipped out of bed and crept to her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. Nothing. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the knob and opened the door just a crack, peering through the slit. The living room was awash in the weak morning light. The sofa was empty. The blanket and pillow she had given David were gone. Her eyes scanned the small room. It was exactly as she had left it, tidy and clean. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there. No note on the table. No indentation on the couch cushions. It was as if David had been a ghost, a phantom conjured by the storm and her own loneliness. A heavy wave of disappointment, tinged with a bitter edge of foolishness, washed over her. She had let him in. She had fed him, given him her clothes, offered him her sanctuary. And he had vanished without a word. No goodbye, no thank you, nothing. The cynical voice in her head, the one forged by hardship and betrayal, whispered, "I told you so. You can't trust anyone. You are alone here." She pushed the door fully open and walked into the living room, the floor cold beneath her bare feet. She checked the bathroom. Empty. Her too small sweatshirt and sweatpants were folded neatly on the closed lid of the toilet seat. The towel he'd used was hung up to dry. At least he hadn't stolen anything. A small, pathetic consolation. She picked up the folded clothes, holding them to her chest. They smelled faintly of her own laundry detergent and something else, a faint, unfamiliar scent of sandalwood. Proof that it had been real. She walked back to the sofa, and ran a hand over the fabric where he had slept. It was cool. He had been gone for hours. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of all her years of struggle, she began her morning routine. The motions were automatic, a ritual of survival. Shower. Dress in her cleaning uniform, a pair of dark slacks and a polo shirt with a small, embroidered logo. Make coffee. The rich, dark aroma usually comforted her, but today it felt hollow. She poured a cup and stood by the window, looking down at the wet streets below. People were already moving, a river of humanity, each person locked in their own private battle. Had David simply melted back into that river? Was he out there somewhere, still lost, still suffering? Or had he used her, seeing a soft-hearted immigrant woman as an easy target for a warm meal and a dry place to crash? The questions swirled in her mind, feeding her sense of disillusionment. She thought of her son, Luis, back in Cuenca. His last video call, his face beaming as he showed her a drawing he'd made for her. "When are you coming home, Mama?" he'd asked, his small voice full of hope. The question was a knife in her heart. She was here, working herself to the bone, so he could have a future, so he could get the medical care he needed for the leg he'd injured in a childhood accident. She was here so he wouldn't have to be. Finishing her coffee, she washed the cup and placed it neatly in the drainer. She had to get to work. Mr. Henderson's office building on the Upper East Side wouldn't clean itself. The disappointment over David was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had real problems, tangible debts, a son who depended on her. She slung her heavy cleaning bag over her shoulder, its familiar weight a grounding presence. She locked her apartment door behind her, the click of the lock sounding more final than ever. As she walked down the stairs and out into the cool morning air, she made a conscious effort to push the memory of the stranger from her mind. It was a lesson learned. A moment of weakness she couldn't afford to repeat. Her kindness, it seemed, was a currency that held no value in this hard, transactional city. She walked towards the subway, her head held high, her heart a little heavier, a little more guarded, building the walls around it a little bit higher. The storm had passed, leaving behind only the damp chill, and the empty space where a flicker of human connection had briefly, and deceptively glowed. The day was long and grueling, as they all were. The scent of bleach and lemon-scented polish clung to Maria's skin and hair, a permanent perfume of her labor. She scrubbed toilets on the 15th floor, vacuumed endless carpets in executive offices, and polished glass tables that reflected her tired face back at her. Her mind, however, kept drifting back to her quiet apartment, to the empty sofa and the folded clothes. The feeling of foolishness was a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. By the time her shift ended, the gray morning had given way to a surprisingly clear, crisp evening. The city lights twinkled, creating a beautiful illusion that masked the grit and struggle below. She trudged up the stairs to her apartment, her body aching with a familiar fatigue. All she wanted was a hot shower, a simple meal, and the mindless comfort of a telenovela before collapsing into bed. She was fumbling for her keys in the dimly lit hallway when a movement at the far end caught her eye. Her breath hitched. A man was standing there, leaning against the wall near her door. It wasn't David. This man was bulkier, dressed in a dark, expensive-looking overcoat. He had a stern, impassive face and held a smartphone, which he was glancing at intently. Fear, cold and immediate, shot through Maria. Had David sent someone? Was this trouble? She froze, her keys clutched tightly in her fist, a pathetic weapon. The man looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. It wasn't a threatening look, but it was intense, appraising. He straightened up. "Señora Flores?" he asked, his voice a low, professional baritone. He knew her name. The fear intensified, coiling in her stomach. How did he know her name? Was it immigration? A landlord issue? Her mind raced through a catalog of potential disasters. "Who are you?" she managed to say, her voice tighter than she wanted. "What do you want?" She took a step back, towards the stairs, ready to flee. The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming something to himself. "My name is Mr. Evans," he said, his tone neutral, carefully devoid of emotion. "I am here on behalf of my employer. We need to ask you a few questions about last night." He gestured towards her apartment door. "May we speak inside? It's a matter of some delicacy." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. I have nothing to say, she stammered. I don't know what you are talking about. Please, leave me alone. She thought of the stories she'd heard of people being taken away, of deportations, of scams targeting vulnerable immigrants. This man, with his expensive coat and impersonal demeanor, embodied all those fears. Mr. Evans didn't move. He simply looked at her, and for the first time, Maria saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not malice, but a kind of weary patience. Senora Flores, you provided shelter to a young man last night during the storm. His name is David. He paused, letting the name hang in the air between them. My employer is very concerned about him. We mean you no harm. We simply wish to understand what happened. The confirmation that this was about David sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. So, he was trouble. And now that trouble was at her door. She looked at Mr. Evans, then at the locked door of her apartment, her sanctuary. Going inside with this man felt like a terrible idea. But standing in the hallway, causing a scene, felt equally dangerous. What choice did she have? If she refused, would he just come back with someone else? With the police? Taking a shaky breath, her hand trembling, she finally managed to insert the key into the lock. The click echoed in the silent hallway. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But only for a moment. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, Mr. Evans following silently behind her. He filled her small living room with his presence, making it feel even smaller and more cramped. He didn't sit, just stood in the center of the room, his eyes doing another quick, efficient scan of her humble home, lingering for a moment on the photograph of Luis. Please, Maria said, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. What is this about? Is David in trouble? I barely knew him. He was just here for one night. I gave him food and a place to sleep. That is all. She was talking too fast, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. Mr. Evans turned his gaze back to her. That is precisely what we need to confirm, Senora Flores. The act of kindness itself. He reached into his inner coat pocket, and Maria flinched, half expecting him to pull out a weapon or a badge. Instead, it was just a small, leather-bound notebook. Can you describe the circumstances? Where you found him? His condition? What you talked about? His questions were clipped, direct. Maria felt a surge of defensive anger. Why? Who are you to ask me these things? He was a human being who was cold and wet. I helped him. Is that a crime now? Her voice rose, fueled by a mix of fear and indignation. He was polite. He was lost. He said he had nowhere to go. I cooked him soup. He slept on that sofa. And in the morning, he was gone. That is the whole story. She pointed a trembling finger at the door. Now please. I have had a long day. I want you to leave. Mr. Evans studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He closed his notebook and slowly returned it to his pocket. He seemed to be making a decision. Very well, he said quietly. Thank you for your time, Senora Flores. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. He looked back at her, and this time, his gaze was different. Softer. For what it's worth, he said. The world could use more people like you. And with that he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft, definitive click. Maria stood frozen in the middle of her living room, her heart still racing, the encounter feeling surreal and deeply unsettling. The apartment, which usually felt like a refuge, now felt exposed and vulnerable. The stranger from the storm had vanished, but his shadow had returned in the form of Mr. Evans, and it felt darker and more threatening than the rain. The encounter with Mr. Evans left Maria feeling unsettled for the rest of the week. A low-grade anxiety hummed in the background of her life, coloring everything. Every time she walked down her hallway, she half expected to see him waiting. Every unexpected knock on the door made her jump. She replayed the conversation in her head, trying to decipher the hidden meanings in his questions. My employer is very concerned about him. Who was his employer? A family? A criminal organization? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. She threw herself into her work, the mindless physical labor of scrubbing and cleaning a welcome distraction from the whirlpool of her thoughts. It was Saturday, her one morning to sleep in, to savor a slow cup of coffee and call Luis. She was in the middle of their video call, listening to him excitedly describe a school project, his sweet face pixelated on her old phone screen, when a firm, authoritative knock echoed through her apartment. Her blood ran cold. It was him. It had to be. Mr. Evans was back. Luis's voice became distant noise as a cold dread gripped her. "Mamá? ¿Estás bien?" Luis asked, his small face creased with concern. "Sí, mi amor, sí," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "I have to go. The postman is here. I love you." She ended the call, her heart hammering. She considered not answering, pretending she wasn't home. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. Smoothing her worn housecoat, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Her breath caught. It wasn't Mr. Evans. It was David. He was standing there, on the other side of the wood. But he was transformed. The shivering, rain-drenched wraith was gone. He stood tall and straight, dressed in a crisp, dark blue button-down shirt and tailored trousers. His hair was neatly styled, his face clean-shaven. He looked healthy, confident, and profoundly out of place in her shabby hallway. And in his hands, he held a simple, elegant white box tied with a silver ribbon. Confusion, relief, and a fresh wave of suspicion warred within her. Why was he here? What was this? Slowly, her hand trembling, she unlatched the chain and opened the door a few inches. "David," she said, her voice barely a whisper. A warm, genuine smile spread across his face, lighting up his hazel eyes. "Maria," he said, and his voice was different too, clearer, warmer, filled with a depth of emotion that hadn't been there before. "May I come in? I owe you an explanation. And so much more." Hesitantly, she opened the door wider, and he stepped inside. He looked around the small apartment, his gaze taking it in with a new sense of reverence. "This place," he said softly. "It felt like a palace that night." He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "First, I need to apologize. Leaving the way I did without a word, it was unforgivably rude. I was overwhelmed. And there were things I had to do, people I had to see, that couldn't wait." Maria just stared at him, utterly bewildered. "The man. Mr. Evans, he was here. He was asking about you. He frightened me." David's face fell, a shadow of guilt passing over it. "I am so sorry about that, Maria. Truly. Mr. Evans is my head of security. I sent him to confirm your address, to make sure you were who I remembered you to be. His manner can be intense. It was a necessary precaution, but I see now how it must have seemed. Please forgive me." "Head of security?" Maria repeated, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. She looked at his expensive clothes, his confident posture. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture she could scarcely comprehend. "David, who are you?" He took a deep breath, meeting her gaze directly. "My full name is David Sterling," he said. The name meant nothing to her. He seemed to sense her confusion. My late father, was Alistair Sterling." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. When Maria still showed no recognition, he gave a small, almost sad smile. "He founded Sterling Global. It's a very large company. I've been away from that life for a long time. After my father passed, I lost my way. I felt trapped by the money, the expectations, the emptiness of it all. I walked away from everything about 6 months ago. I wanted to see if I could exist without my name, my wealth. I wanted to find out who I really was." Maria listened, her mind reeling. It sounded like a plot from one of her telenovelas. The billionaire prince who disappears to live among the common people. It was absurd. Impossible. "It was a foolish, romantic idea," David continued, his voice laced with self-recrimination. "I thought I could handle it. But I wasn't prepared for the reality. I was robbed, lost my identification, my credit cards, everything. I was too proud and too ashamed to call for help. For the last 3 weeks I've been nowhere. Sleeping on park benches in subway cars. I was losing myself for real. The night of the storm. I had hit rock bottom. I was cold, hungry, and I had given up. I was ready to just disappear. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked at her. And then you found me. You who had so little, saw a human being in need and you opened your door. You didn't see a homeless man, or a problem, or a threat. You saw me. You gave me the first real kindness I had experienced in months. You saved me, Maria. Not just from the cold, but from myself. He held out the white box to her. This is a small token. A thank you. But it is nothing compared to what you have given me. Maria, her hands trembling, took the box. It was heavier than it looked. She slowly untied the silver ribbon and lifted the lid. Nestled inside on a bed of black velvet was a brand new, top-of-the-line smartphone. But that wasn't all. Tucked into the side of the box was a small, rectangular piece of paper. She pulled it out. It was a check. Her eyes dropped to the amount, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had to blink several times, her brain refusing to process the number of zeros written there. It was made out to her. For $1 million. The air left her lungs in a rush. She stared at the check, then at David, then back at the check. Her legs felt weak. I cannot. She stammered, her voice breaking. This is too much. I cannot accept this. David stepped forward, his expression earnest, intense. Maria, look at me. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You restored my faith in people. This, he said, gesturing to the check. This is just money. It's the one thing I have too much of. Please. Let me do this. Let me change your life, the way you changed mine. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, spilling over and tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She looked from the impossible number on the check to the face of the young man she had sheltered. This wasn't a dream. It was real. The storm, the stranger, the empty sofa, the frightening visitor. It had all led to this impossible, miraculous moment. The weight of a lifetime of struggle seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating sense of hope. She was holding a future in her hands. Luis's future. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Maria's fingers, numb and clumsy, clutched the check as if it were a sacred relic, or a live wire that might vanish at any moment. $1 million. The number echoed in her mind, a seismic shock that had obliterated the landscape of her reality. She looked from the piece of paper to David's face, searching for any hint of a joke, a trick, a cruel prank. But all she saw was profound gratitude and a fierce, determined sincerity. I don't understand, she finally whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. It is too much. What I did was nothing. Any decent person would have done the same. She tried to hand the check back to him, her arm feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. David gently closed her fingers back over the check, his own hand warm and steadying. But they didn't, Maria, he said softly. You walked past me. I saw you. And you were the only one who turned back. In a city of millions, you were the only one. That nothing you did was everything to me. He gestured around her small, tidy apartment. You live a life of hard work and sacrifice. I saw your son's picture. I see how you care for this place. This money, it isn't charity. It's an investment. An investment in a person of profound character. It's a chance for you to stop just surviving and start truly living. The mention of Luis was the key that unlocked the dam holding back her emotions. A sob escaped her, then another. She brought her hands, still clutching the check, to her face, the paper crisp against her wet skin. Visions flashed behind her eyes. Luis, running in a park, his legs strong and healed, without a trace of a limp. Luis, in a clean, bright school uniform, with new books and a backpack that wasn't falling apart. A small house, maybe back in Ecuador, with a garden. Her mother, finally able to rest. Herself, not bent over a toilet scrubber, but holding her son, reading him a story, being present in his life. The dreams she had locked away in a deep, dusty corner of her heart were now bursting forth, brilliant and vivid, and achingly within reach. "Luis," she choked out. "My son. He has needed a surgery for his leg for 2 years. The doctors said it would help him walk without pain." She couldn't finish the sentence. The hope was too overwhelming. "Then that is the first thing we do," David said, his voice firm with resolve. "We will get him the best doctors, the best care, here in the States if you want. We will bring him here, or you can go to him. Whatever you want, Maria. This is your life now. You get to choose." The concept was so alien it was dizzying. Choice. For so long, her life had been a series of reactions. To bills, to work schedules, to crises. The idea that she could now be the author of her own story, that she could make decisions based on desire and not desperate need, was as revolutionary as the check itself. She looked at David, this young man who had fallen from the sky, and now felt like an angel sent to deliver her. "Why?" she asked again, the question a mere breath. "Why me?" David smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Because the universe or God or whatever you believe in, put me in that doorway for a reason. And it put you on that street for a reason. You showed me that humanity and decency aren't dead. You reminded me that my father's fortune, for all the complications it brought, could be a force for genuine, life-changing good. By helping me, you gave me a purpose for my wealth that I never had before. So you see, Maria, you saved us both." He pointed to the smartphone in the box. "That phone has my personal number programmed into it. It's the only number that rings directly to me. Anytime, day or night, you call me. If you have any questions, any problems, any needs at all. Mr. Evans will also be available to help you with any logistics. Getting the check cashed, setting up a bank account, legal matters, travel for Luis. He works for you now, too, if you'll have him." The thought of the stern Mr. Evans working for her was almost comical. The entire situation was so surreal, so far beyond the boundaries of her imagination, that a hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, mixing with her tears. She was crying and laughing at the same time, the emotional dam completely broken. David simply waited, his presence a calm, steady anchor in the storm of her joy. After a few minutes, she began to calm, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her housecoat. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first full breath she felt she had taken in years. She looked at the check again, now slightly crumpled and damp with her tears. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a key. A passport. A miracle. She carefully, reverently, placed it back inside the box with the phone. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound gravity. "I don't have the words, but thank you. From the bottom of my heart, and from the heart of my son, who does not yet know that his world has just been made new." David nodded, his own eyes looking suspiciously bright. "The thanks are all mine, Maria. Now," he said, his tone becoming gently practical, "where would you like to begin?" Maria looked around her small apartment, but she no longer saw its shabbiness. She saw the launching pad for a miracle. She walked over to the photograph of Luis, picking it up and holding it to her chest. She turned back to David, a radiant tear-streaked smile finally breaking through like the sun after a long storm. "I begin," she said, her voice clear and full of a hope so fierce it felt like a force of nature. "By calling my son." The sleek black phone felt alien in Maria's work-roughened hands. It was light, yet it carried the weight of a new universe. Her fingers, more accustomed to the texture of scrub brushes and the grip of a mop, trembled as she navigated the intuitive screen. David had shown her the basics before he left with a final, warm embrace and a promise to call her tomorrow. Now, she was alone again in her apartment, but the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or exhaustion. It was the sacred, humming silence of anticipation. Of a prayer about to be answered. She found the video call function, her heart hammering a joyful, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She input her sister's number in Cuenca, the number she called every Sunday like clockwork, her weekly dose of joy and heartache. It was only Friday. This would be a surprise. The line rang once, twice. She could see her own reflection in the dark screen, a woman with tired eyes that now sparkled with an unquenchable light. Then, the screen flickered to life, and her sister Carmen's face appeared, squinting slightly in confusion. Maria? ¿Qué pasa? Is everything okay? Carmen's voice was laced with immediate concern. A call outside of Sunday could only mean an emergency. Everything is okay, Carmencita, Maria said, and the smile that spread across her face was so wide it hurt her cheeks. Better than okay. Everything is perfect. She shifted the phone so her sister could see more of the room, as if to prove that nothing was wrong. Carmen's brow remained furrowed. You are crying? Maria, tell me what is wrong. In the background, Maria could see the familiar faded floral wallpaper of her sister's living room. Tears of joy, Hermana. The purest joy. Maria took a deep, steadying breath. Is Luis there? I need to see him. I need to talk to you both. It is urgent. The concern on Carmen's face deepened, but she nodded and called out. Luis. Ven. Es tu mamá. There was a clatter of small footsteps, and then his face filled the screen. Her beautiful boy. His dark, expressive eyes were wide with the same concern as his aunt's. Mama. You are calling early. Are you sick? His small voice, so full of love and worry, was the final thread that snapped the last of her composure. Fresh, happy tears streamed down her face. No, my love, no. Mama is not sick. Mama is. She struggled for the words. How do you tell your child that the axis of his world has just shifted? Mama has had a miracle happen. A real miracle. Luis's head tilted. A miracle? Like in the Bible. Exactly like that, mi cielo. Maria's voice was thick with emotion. Do you remember the drawing you sent me? The one of you running in a field with the green kite. Luis nodded, his expression turning shy. See. The kite was flying so high. That drawing gave me hope, my love. And now, that hope is coming true. She leaned closer to the screen, as if she could reach through it and pull him into her arms. Luis, listen to me. You remember the doctors said you needed a special operation for your leg? The one that would stop it from hurting when you run. A shadow passed over his face. He was old enough to know that the operation was a source of great worry, a mountain they could not climb. See. But you said it was very expensive. It is okay, Mama, it does not hurt that much. His brave little lie shattered her, and rebuilt her all at once. It is okay to tell the truth, my brave boy. And I am telling you the truth now. We are going to get you that operation. The best doctors. The best hospital. We are going to fix your leg, Luis. For good. There was a stunned silence from both ends of the call. Carmen's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Luis just stared, processing. How? Carmen finally whispered, her voice trembling. Maria, a surgery like that, the travel, the doctors, it is a fortune. It is taken care of, Maria said, her voice firm and clear, a tone she hadn't used in years. All of it. By a friend. A very good and generous friend. The details are a long story, a story I will tell you when I see you. But I need you to believe me. This is real. She watched as the realization dawned on her son's face. It started in his eyes, a slow-burning spark of understanding that grew into a brilliant, blazing star of hope. Really, Mama? Truly? I will be able to run? Really run? Like the other boys? Like the wind, my love. Like the wind. Maria's heart felt like it would burst. And that is not all. We are going to be together. Soon. I am going to come home for a while, and then we will see. We can decide our future together. You and me. The dam broke on the other side of the screen. Luis let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy, jumping up and down, his image becoming a blur on the screen. Did you hear, Tia? Did you hear? My leg. And Mama is coming home. Carmen was crying openly now, tears of relief and shared joy, asking rapid-fire questions in Spanish that Maria gently deflected, promising to explain everything soon. For the next 20 minutes, they talked not of problems, but of possibilities. They dreamed aloud. A house with a yard. A dog, perhaps. Luis talked about the sports he would try. Carmen talked about Maria finally being able to rest. The conversation was a beautiful, chaotic, joyful symphony of plans and laughter and tears. It was no longer a fantasy, it was a blueprint for a new life. When they finally said their goodbyes with a dozen "I love yous" exchanged, Maria placed the phone down on her table. She looked around her apartment. The same four walls, the same modest furniture. But everything was different. The air itself tasted sweeter. The fear and uncertainty that had been her constant companions had packed their bags and left. In their place was a profound, unshakable peace, and a wild, thrilling sense of anticipation. She had made a phone call, and in doing so, had bridged the distance between a life of struggle and a life of hope. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time, she knew the path ahead was leading somewhere beautiful. The days that followed were a whirlwind, a surreal ballet of the mundane and the miraculous. Maria went to work, scrubbing the same offices, but the bleach smell no longer felt like a prison sentence. It felt like a familiar ritual she was performing one last time. Her colleagues noticed a change. "Maria, you are glowing," one of them said. "Did you win the lottery?" Maria just smiled a secret, knowing smile, and said, "Something like that." She hadn't told anyone about the money. It felt too fragile, too sacred, a newborn fawn she needed to protect until it was strong enough to walk on its own. True to his word, David had Mr. Evans assist her. The stern man was now her personal liaison to a world of privilege and efficiency she never knew existed. The morning after David's visit, a sleek black car picked her up from her apartment and took her to a private bank in Midtown. Instead of waiting in a long line under fluorescent lights, she was ushered into a quiet, wood-paneled office where a vice president, a polished woman named Ms. Carter, greeted her by name and with a warm, respectful smile. Mr. Evans stood by, a silent, imposing presence that seemed to make all obstacles vanish. The process of depositing the check, which Maria had imagined would be a bureaucratic nightmare filled with suspicion and questions, was seamless. Ms. Carter handled everything with a calm, professional grace. She spoke to Maria not with condescension, but as a valued client. They discussed setting up savings accounts, investment portfolios, words that had never been part of Maria's vocabulary. Ms. Carter, sensing Maria's overwhelm, gently suggested a simpler, immediate plan. A high-yield savings account for the bulk of the money, and a checking account with a substantial, but not overwhelming balance for her immediate use. "Your first priority is your son's health and your family's comfort, Maria," Ms. Carter said. "The rest we can manage for you, and we can meet again when you are ready." She handed Maria a dark, embossed debit card. It felt heavy, substantial. "This is linked to your checking account. Use it for whatever you need." Walking out of the bank an hour later, Maria felt like she was floating. The New York streets, usually a battlefield, felt like a carnival. The honking cars were a celebration, the rushing crowd a river of possibility. Mr. Evans, walking beside her, was no longer a figure of fear, but a steadfast guardian. "The next step," he said, his voice low, "is travel. David has a jet on standby. It can be at Teterboro Airport ready to take you to Ecuador whenever you wish." A private jet. The concept was so ludicrously extravagant that Maria actually laughed, a clear, happy sound that surprised even her. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Thank you, but no. I need to do this my way. I need it to feel real." She looked at Mr. Evans. "I want to buy a ticket. A first-class ticket, yes, because I have never flown anything but economy, and my back aches just thinking about it. But I want to buy it myself." A flicker of what might have been approval crossed Mr. Evans's normally impassive face. "Understood," he said. "I will handle the logistics and have the options sent to your new phone." And so, sitting on her sofa that evening, Maria used the magical new device to do something she had never done before. She booked a first-class, one-way ticket from New York to Cuenca. The price made her gasp, but the act of typing in her own passport number, her own credit card, the new one the bank had issued her, felt empowering. It was her first conscious, deliberate act in her new life of choice. She was not a passenger on someone else's journey. She was the captain of her own ship. The next few days were a blissful frenzy of preparation. She gave her 2 weeks' notice at the cleaning company. her boss's shock a minor footnote in the grand narrative of her transformation. She didn't pack her life into suitcases, she curated it. She kept the photograph of Luis, her grandmother's crucifix, a few items of sentimental value. The rest, the worn-out furniture, the old pots and pans, the tired cleaning uniforms, she decided to leave behind. Let them be a blessing for the next person who needed a start. She bought new suitcases, sturdy and elegant. She went to a department store and, with a saleswoman's helpful guidance, bought a new wardrobe for herself. Clothes that were comfortable, well-made, and beautiful. Not extravagant, but dignified. She bought gifts for Carmen, for Luis, for her mother. The simple act of walking into a store and buying a new winter coat for her son, without looking at the price tag, was a thrill that rivaled the bank deposit. One afternoon, she found herself standing in a quiet, upscale toy store, looking at a display of professional-grade soccer balls. She remembered Luis's drawing, the green kite. But he also loved soccer, though he could only ever watch from the sidelines. She picked up a ball, the leather smooth and perfect under her fingertips. She was going to bring him this ball. And she was going to be there when he kicked it for the first time without wincing in pain. This was the practical magic of her new life. It wasn't just about the money in an account. It was about the specific, tangible joys it could facilitate. It was about a suitcase, a plane ticket, a soccer ball, and the promise of a pain-free run. Her life, once a stark monochrome of survival, was now being painted in the vibrant, breathtaking colors of hope and love. The final day of her job arrived, cloaked in the same gray light as so many others, but Maria saw it through a different lens. Today, the grimy subway car was a chariot carrying her to the last page of an old, difficult chapter. The familiar weight of her cleaning bag felt lighter, as if it knew its duty was almost done. She walked into the gleaming lobby of the office building for the last time, not as a servant, but as a woman passing through on her way to a grander destiny. Her supervisor, Brenda, a weary woman with kind eyes buried under layers of corporate stress, met her with a sad smile. "I still can't believe you're really leaving us, Maria. You're the best we have. You sure we can't change your mind?" She held out a small, white envelope. "It's just a little something from all of us." Maria took the envelope, her throat tight. Inside was a card signed by all the cleaning staff and office managers she'd worked with over the years, filled with scrawled, heartfelt messages of good luck. Tucked inside was a $50 gift card to a local coffee shop. The gesture, so small in the face of her new reality, felt enormous in its sincerity. It was a token from a world of people who understood struggle, who celebrated any small escape from it. "Thank you, Brenda," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. You have always been fair to me." "What are you going to do?" Brenda asked, her curiosity genuine. Maria thought of the private bank, the first-class ticket, the $1 million. She looked at Brenda's tired, hopeful face and the faces of her other colleagues, women from Ghana, Poland, the Philippines, all with their own versions of her old story. She would not cheapen their struggle with her unbelievable fortune. "I am going home," Maria said simply, and it was the truth, just not the whole truth. "My son needs me. It is time." It was an answer they could all understand and respect. The pull of family was a universal language. She spent her shift doing her work with a strange, newfound reverence. As she ran the buffer over the 15th floor lobby's marble, she wasn't just polishing stone. She was honoring the memory of the woman who had done this job to survive. As she wiped down the glass conference tables, she saw not just her reflection, but the ghost of her past self, the one who looked back with weary determination. She was saying goodbye to that woman, thanking her for her strength, for her resilience, for never giving up. That woman had earned this miracle. At the end of the shift, she changed out of her uniform for the last time, folding it neatly and placing it in her bag. She wouldn't need it anymore. She said her goodbyes to the women in the locker room, hugs and promises to keep in touch that they all knew were unlikely to be kept, but were heartfelt nonetheless. They wished her well, their eyes filled with a mixture of sadness for their own stagnant situations and genuine happiness for her escape. Walking out of the building, she didn't look back. The city air tasted of freedom. She didn't head for the subway immediately. Instead, she walked a few blocks to a small park she had always hurried past. She sat on a bench, watching pigeons strut and children play. She took out the gift card from her colleagues and simply held it. It was a tangible piece of her old life, a life of small kindnesses and immense hardships. She would keep it forever, a humble reminder of where she came from. Her new phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Mr. Evans. Asterisk, flight is confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. from JFK. A car will pick you up at 7 a.m. All luggage arrangements have been made. Asterisk, she typed back a simple, asterisk, thank you. Asterisk, then, she opened her photos and scrolled to the picture of Luis she had taken during their last video call. His face alight with the news of her coming home. This was her future. This was her purpose. She stood up from the bench, a final, symbolic act of leaving the old behind. The last scrub was done. The last floor was buffed. The last goodbye was said. A profound sense of completion settled over her. There was no fear about the future, only a quiet, unshakable confidence. She had survived the storm, both literal and metaphorical. She had offered kindness without expectation, and in return, had been given a second chance at life. She walked towards the subway station, not with the tired trudge of a cleaning lady, but with the purposeful stride of a woman who knew exactly where she was going, and who she was going home to. The past was a closed door. Tomorrow, she would step onto a plane and fly into the dawn of her new beginning. The hum of the jet engines was a soothing lullaby of motion. Nestled in the impossibly wide leather seat of the first-class cabin, Maria looked out the window at a blanket of fluffy white clouds below, the sun brilliant and close. The flight attendant had offered her champagne, a glass of orange juice, a warm towel. The surreal luxury of it all was no longer intimidating. It was a beautiful, quiet interlude, a peaceful bridge between her two lives. She slept, a deep, untroubled sleep, and when she awoke, the pilot's voice announced they were beginning their descent into Mariscal Lamar Airport in Cuenca. Her heart, calm for most of the journey, now began to beat a frantic, joyful salsa. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and as it taxied, Maria saw the familiar beautiful Andes Mountains encircling the city, their green slopes a welcome embrace. This was home. But she was returning not as the woman who had left, burdened by failure and fear, but as a conqueror. The doors opened, and the warm, thin air of the high altitude filled the cabin, carrying scents of earth and aviation fuel that were the perfume of her childhood. She walked through the modern, small airport, her new suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. And then, she saw them. Just past the security gate, held back by a barrier. Carmen, her face streaked with tears, jumping up and down and waving frantically. And next to her, holding Carmen's hand, was Luis. He was standing straight, his little body vibrating with excitement. In his free hand, he clutched the green kite from his drawing. The sight of it, this physical manifestation of their shared dream, broke her. She started to run, abandoning her suitcase, her purse, everything. Mama. Mama. Luis's voice, high and clear, cut through the airport noise. She broke through the gate and fell to her knees, her arms opening wide. Luis let go of the kite and the string and launched himself into her embrace. She buried her face in his hair, inhaling his unique little boy scent, feeling the solid real weight of him in her arms after so long. She was sobbing, great, heaving sobs of release and absolute joy. Carmen wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a weeping, laughing, tangled knot of love and family. Mi niño, mi amor, mi Luis, Maria whispered, kissing his head, his face, his hands. I am here. I am home. You are really here, Luis cried, clinging to her neck. And you smell like an airplane. Maria laughed through her tears, the sound echoing in the bustling airport. She stood up, lifting him with an ease that surprised her. He was getting so big. She held him on her hip, his legs wrapped around her, and he felt perfect. She hugged Carmen tightly with her free arm. You have no idea, she whispered to her sister. I think I am starting to, Carmen whispered back, her eyes shining with happy tears. They collected her luggage and walked out of the airport into the bright Cuenca sunshine. The city felt both familiar and new. The whitewashed buildings, the red-tiled roofs, the cobblestone streets. It was all the same, but she was seeing it with new eyes. They drove to Carmen's simple but loving home in the outskirts of the city. The familiar sights and sounds, the stray dogs sleeping in the sun, the old women selling fruit on the corner, the majestic Catedral de la Inmaculada Concepcion in the distance, washed over her like a healing balm. That evening, they had a feast. Carmen had cooked all of Maria's favorite dishes. 星号 Hornado 星号 Mocan Chitran 星号 Empanadas de Viento 星号. The small house was filled with laughter and the rapid, musical cadence of Spanish. Maria told them the whole story then, leaving nothing out. The storm. The shivering stranger. The soup. The empty sofa. The frightening Mr. Evans. The return of David, transformed. The check. The phone call. The bank. As she spoke, she watched their faces cycle through disbelief, awe, fear, and finally, a dawning, radiant joy that mirrored her own. "It is a miracle," her mother, who had come over, said, making the sign of the cross. "God sent you an angel in disguise." "I think he did, Mama," Maria said, squeezing Luis's hand. "I think he did." After dinner, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they went to the small field behind Carmen's house. Luis, clutching the green kite, looked at Maria, his eyes full of a question. "Can I, Mama? Can I try?" "Of course, my love," she said, her heart swelling. "Run." And he did. He wasn't fast, and his gait was still slightly uneven, but he ran. He ran across the grass, the kite trailing behind him, then lifting, catching the evening breeze, soaring into the colorful sky. He laughed, a pure, unburdened sound Maria had never heard before, a sound that was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every drop of sweat. She watched him, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face once more, but these were tears of completion. This was the moment. This was the payoff for a lifetime of faith and struggle. She looked up at the kite, a green speck of hope dancing in the twilight, and then at her son, his face turned to the sky, full of wonder and free from pain. She was home. Not just in a place, but in her soul. The journey of the immigrant, the act of kindness, the surprising reward, it had all led here, to this perfect, emotional and transformative ending. Her story was no longer one of hardship, but of hope. And it was only just beginning. Months drifted into a new, gentle rhythm. Maria and Luis settled into a comfortable, bright apartment in Cuenca, not far from Carmen and her mother. It was a home filled with light, with books, with the sound of Luis's laughter, and with a peace that was almost palpable. The first and most profound order of business was Luis's leg. Using the resources David had made available, Maria consulted with the top pediatric orthopedic specialists, first in Quito, and then, upon their recommendation, at a world-renowned hospital in Santiago, Chile. The journey was no longer a source of terror, but of focused hope. They flew business class, Luis wide-eyed with excitement at the adventure. The surgery was complex, but successful. The doctors were confident he would make a full recovery, that the slight limp would disappear, and the chronic pain would become a distant memory. During the long weeks of physical therapy, Maria was by his side every moment, not as a frantic mother worrying about the cost of each session, but as a calm, present force of encouragement. She watched his strength return, his confidence grow with each passing day. The sight of him taking his first unaided pain-free steps was a second miracle, quieter